we answered the question that everyone wants to know in this episode today. Who's the strongest? And of course, Eric, there's a huge exclusion we had to make in this discussion. We're talking about weightlifters, powerlifters, and strongman competitors. Who's the strongest, given all those different sports? And we had to exclude bodybuilders. We had to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's just not fair when you use the only metric of strength that really matters is how strong do you look. Because as you'll see, and I'm not even kidding on this one, we had a very difficult time trying to figure out, well, what's the way that we would actually test our suppositions, even for this thought experiment. Like if we were to set up a competition, we agreed on trap bar deadlifts, high bar squats, but we had some other things that were put out and maybe not ever confirmed by the whole panel. Farmer's walk, I don't know. Weighted chin up, sort of maybe. Overhead press, maybe not, I don't know. The only thing we didn't devolve into, which I'm actually surprised and disappointed at the same time, was who would win in a fight. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need to do that episode. Like, let's train deadlifts because that'll make me better at fighting people.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I think we were close to devolving into a Joe Rogan conversation of who'd win in a fight, a grizzly bear or a silverback gorilla. Luckily, we're just talking about strength athletes, and the answer is the audience is the winner today because we're just basically speculating for damn near 2 hours with Johnny Candido, Alan Thrall, and Max Aida. So if you like talking lifting, you like hoisting, you like big boys going at it.
And there's no better crew to have on here. And of course, to be fair, this is a discussion about in the jungle, absolute strength.
Yeah.
So not to exclude anyone, but we were absolutely focusing on the super heavies and males, you know? I think if we were to, like you mentioned towards the end, and I'm going to spoil the plot, one metric of strength that all of these individuals we discussed probably would fail on is tying your shoes without passing out. So, for every gimme, there's a gotcha, as they say. You may be the strongest man in the jungle, but if your shoe's untied and that tiger's coming, you may not be waking up after you pass out from trying to tie that shoe.
Eric, do you mind if I just commandeer this episode real quick? Because I think we can end this in probably 3 minutes, my friend.
Our best episodes are 2 to 3 minutes, so
yeah,
or at least that's how long people listen for.
Right, how long we listen back to. We're like, that was a great episode. So we're talking about who's the strongest athlete of all time or the strongest sport. And there's various debates. We have individuals here who have done weightlifting, powerlifting, a strongman, a combination thereof. I'm going to put forth that there's another answer. And I'm just going to ask some questions quickly with a yes or no. Guess I'm going to go around, ask you a simple question. It's a yes or no, okay? So, Johnny, I'll start with you. Are you aware of any powerlifter that has won a truck for his estranged son and reunited the nuclear family? Are you aware? Has that ever happened in powerlifting?
No, I don't believe so.
Great, thank you. Alan, my friend, strongman, are you aware of any individual who has won a truck to recover an estranged relationship with his son?
No.
Thank you. Max, my other friend, weightlifting. You've done a lot of things, but weightlifting. Are you familiar of any weightlifter, doesn't matter if it's from the block, if it's from the Chinese weightlifting system, that has won a truck in a weightlifting competition and repaired a broken relationship with the long-lost love of his life, his son?
I've heard of Albanians winning donkeys,
right,
and the estranged son scenario, but never a truck.
Thank you. Okay, so Eric, they're probably not aware of this. Guys, you may have heard of this, arm wrestling documentary called Pulling John. Great documentary. There was an earlier one that predated it. A lot of people aren't aware of it. It's called Over the Top. It stars this arm wrestler, Sly Stallone. Anyways, inside that documentary, he fights for his son. He has an estranged relationship with him in order to prove his love and affection and show that he can be that, father figure that he desperately needs. He enters an arm wrestling competition and he wins a truck. And with that truck, he repairs that broken relationship. And I would put forth, what is stronger in life than the nuclear family? And so Sly Stallone, the arm wrestler, showed that arm wrestling is superior to all these petty little, you're picking up stones, oh cool, weightlifting, jerking over your head. He repaired a broken relationship and saved his son's soul. Eric, it has nuclear in it, nuclear family, arm wrestling. It's the greatest. Are we done here?
Well, let me be a meme of myself very briefly in order to help your case in point. So I am science for this episode. You're welcome, all science. And you discussed the nuclear family, bonding nuclear atoms together. Now, are we aware of the difference between an atomic explosion and a nuclear explosion? Which one's bigger? Nuclear, that is fusing atoms together, much greater explosion than when you break it. Makes Nagasaki and Hiroshima look like child's play. No offense to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tragic, really bad, but not as bad as a theoretical nuclear explosion. We're talking about world-ending devastation. So if that isn't direct and irrefutable proof of your point, Omar, I don't know what is.
Thank you. So we'll just say, Johnny, at the end of the episode, where can people find you?
You can find me at Candido Training HQ,
No,
and that's pretty much everything.
But bro, what's the TikTok handle? Like we're old media here by doing, a podcast. We're just hanging out with our friends, but we need the TikTok names, fam.
I would have done TikTok if it was still Musically. That's when it was underground. But then it went mainstream, and I just can't partake. It's too popular now.
Right.
They ruined it.
Well, you know what? The good news is, this is excellent news. So those who don't know, I've got two different headphones here. I know they look like they're connected. They're not. One is a direct line. This is a plug-in app that you can modify to TikTok, to the TikTok crew. That's the TTC, as we call them here at Iron Culture. They give me live updates between pop locking and baby videos and pop locking baby cat videos to let us know how we're doing on Iron Culture. And they said, don't end it here, folks. We actually want to talk more. Omar, you may have convinced everyone here. Science may be on your side, but the most important thing of all, TikTok does not buy into your argument. And they said, you know what? You brought on Max Ada, you brought on Alan Thrall, you brought on Johnny Candido. We want to hear from them. What do they think about strength sport? And they do believe that only the strongest survive, or those who are best at dancing while they're petting their cat, playing music in the background while it's dubbed. So they want to hear everyone's input. So I think with that, maybe we should introduce our guests before we say thank you for them being on, although clever format change. We've got 2 3-peats today. This is great news. We've got Max Ada and Alan Thrall on for the 3rd time, which means if you two pay us just a low price of $2,000, you'll be able to clear thetans from cult members, and our cult members have a whole lot of thetans. I know it seems like this is kind of like joining the Iron Culture is like to your benefit. We offer you a mic, we get you some exposure. We allow you to grace our presence. We give you optional spots on the Out Alpha tour, Masculinity in Crisis. You get to be a part of it. But really, it's just the best business model, not yet banned by the federal government, where we give you something worth about $100, and then you find yourself paying us thousands of dollars to do something that is not real and
Kind of
ethically
shaped Eric
questionable.
like. What's it shaped like?
Yes. We don't throw up the rock here. We throw up the pyramid.
Yeah. Can I sell licenses to distribute licenses for the Iron Cultural Podcast? Is that how that works?
Absolutely. So the thing, though, is that you will have people underneath you. They'll have people underneath them.
Yep.
It's a bit of a hierarchy. And then we get 99% of each one of those commissions, but you get to keep a solid 1% of their 1%.
You're part of the 1%,
Yep.
Max.
Yeah, you're a 1%er. Yep. So you get to claim superiority while being in a net loss as far as your income is concerned, because it is quite expensive to buy the thetan clearing devices from us.
Right.
But it'll work out. You'll at the very least get to go to one of our no expenses paid vacations to Vegas, where we discuss how amazing you are at selling. And
I'll be an entrepreneur too, so I can.
Oh yeah, you put
in
that
the bio.
in your Instagram handle. Absolutely. Not sure if there's such thing as a TikTok handle, but you could put that. Nope, not a thing. Sorry, just heard it right here. And then lastly, we got Johnny Candido, the man who at one time was the king of YouTube, and today he doesn't even know how to actually see us on his camera, and he's using items in his household to prop us up on a tripod. So, how the mighty have fallen. But the good news is you're on the climb. You've been on the Iron Culture podcast twice now.
Mm-hmm.
And in all seriousness, we are.
It has
honored.
Single-handedly saved everything. It's made me relevant again. I have to say.
Absolutely, or at the very least, brought you down to our level, so that's we can get up to yours. It's kind of like we climb the backs of other people and pull the ceiling down to us so that we can feel more more important. But in all seriousness, really excited to have you all three on. We have some really cool perspectives on strength. For those who don't remember, we had Max Ada on with Steffi Cohen for the hybrid training discussion. This is going to be similar to that. We're going to be talking about how to train, or really how do the different Iron Game disciplines impact one another. We got Alan Thrall, who is basically a successful version of me, minus embarrassing bodybuilding photos. He's good at weightlifting, good at powerlifting, good at strongman. And by good, I mean better than me, which is the metric for all things.
Right.
He was on our strongman roundtable with Joey Zatmary. And then, of course, like I said, Johnny Candido back again. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you. And let's talk about like Marvel versus DC of strength. That's basically the goal today. Omar, you want to start this thing off? I've been rambling a bit.
Okay, no, my friend, you've been on point. And for those listening, we are battling against, obviously, Joe Rogan. And his question, if those have listened, is who to win in a fight: a silverback versus, a grizzly bear. This is the strength equivalent, okay? So I think when we have this conversation, we've heard it before in gyms. And Max, you could probably actually attest to this, man, because I want to start with you. You go back further in training than our other two guests. And these conversations, you were joking off air, how, they were kind of hot, really hot, 97 to 2003, where people kind of want that neat answer. They always want the answer. So it's like, I want to be the best, or I want to be the strongest, or in some sort of way, how does this justify my time investment into this given sport? Well, there's other sports too. It's like, but are they transferable? Are they comparable? Well, yeah, weightlifter they squat. They need a squat for their lifting, but a powerlifter specializes in. But then wait, a strongman, like, you see those stones? You think that powerlifter could pick up that stone? So I think to open it up, I want to ask you the question, for you personally, you doing weightlifting and then you doing powerlifting and coaching in between and hybrid and everything therein. If you could just comment on some of the athletes or what you've seen participating in these sports. So let's start off with those two, opening up between the ones that probably get compared a little bit more commonly until the Giants came in, honestly, like Eddie Hall, Half Thor, which exploded strongman kind of to the front where it's like, yeah, Andre Milanichev, yeah, he squats a lot. But if Eddie Hall squatted and did a powerlifting meet, he would blow him out of the water. So you've been in it for over 20 years, man. I want to hear some thoughts.
I think when it all, let me take you guys back to a time when the source of information on the internet was deepsquatter.com and T Nation. It might have even been called testosterone at the time.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to be, the argument was always like, this little argument was always like weightlifting versus powerlifting. Strongman was kind of in there, and those guys battled back and forth. And there was a constant discussion about like, who's actually this way or that way, stronger, better, until CrossFit came along, and then everyone just started making fun of CrossFit. Maybe for the first 5 years, till CrossFit actually became something where people made enough money to sustain their life, and then all the powerlifters, weightlifters, kind of retracted and kind of hid in the shadows. But it was always like, I would say it's always been weightlifting versus powerlifting as the biggest. What's the which one is which one's better. I think that coming from my background and what I've seen, and one thing I can say anecdotally is that people that come from weightlifting as a background are going to excel in powerlifting. And you've seen that happen, many times. Maybe not going from being like a great weightlifter to being an exceptional powerlifter, but going from weightlifting to powerlifting is a very easy transition. You just lay down and bench press. Going from powerlifting to weightlifting has always been a different transition, much more rare. I can only think of one guy who went from exceptional powerlifting to exceptional weightlifting, and that was Caleb Williams. And he went from single ply IPF rules junior world record squat to American record clean and jerk. So he was like the one that I can think of offhand right now that really made that transition. But like it's always been like weightlifting as a foundation in the hierarchy. I would put weightlifting number one. You are good at that. You learn that. Everything else after is, everything that you try after, you're going to be, suited to do.
Mm. So are you saying that the mobility demands of a full squat jerk and maybe a snatch are higher than a medium grip, slightly arched bench press, or equivalent?
I think my bad. Let me correct that. I think the fundamental layer is multiply bench only. If you can do that well, you've got everything else covered. I think there's something else outside of just like the mobility. It's the ability to control your body, the ability to control the implement, the barbell, that I think makes something, it provides like a unique skill for weightlifters, because it's not just that, you do weightlifting and then suddenly, powerlifting is pretty easy. There's a lot of other things you can do athletically after that I think people that are decent weightlifters, pick up other skills pretty quickly. I wasn't like a super athletic kid. You can edit that out. But I wasn't like a super athletic kid. But when I did weightlifting and I got pretty decent at it, I was able to kind of like, I felt more athletic. I was more capable, when I tried other things, bowling, for example. No, but like there's definitely like some, intangible component to being decent at weightlifting that lends itself really well to picking up other stuff.
Okay. I've got a follow-up question for you, and this one is more serious than my comparison between bench and squat jerks. In your mind, who do you think is probably the most impressive, the strongest and the most dominating weightlifter? I'll make it easy for you. Let's go super heavies. Let's talk, because we know there's no weight classes in the jungle. That applies to all sports.
Obviously, right. And there's no drug tests in the jungle either. So I would say, obviously, recently it's been Lasha. Lasha's, by far ahead of everybody else. There's been some other like notable, very impressive lifters. I think the 1980s, late 80s had three Soviets or three, Eastern Bloc, two Soviet lifters, Leonid Taranenko, Antonio Krasev of Bulgaria, and Alexander Krilovich of the USSR. And those three guys were at competitions consistently, all snatching over 210 and clean and jerking over 250. And for reference, I think maybe the number of people that have done a 260 clean and jerk is under 20 ever in the history of the sport. So you have three guys regularly trying these numbers right there. And so like as a time back then, the competitiveness there was amazing, and it heightened it to that level. Lasha is alone. He's just one dude going out there, and he's already won it before the, his opening lift is taken, because he's going to outsnatch everybody by 10 kilos. So he's dominant in a way that's like unique, where he's not being driven by tons of other competition.
Mm-hmm. So just for the iron cultists who maybe aren't familiar with weightlifting, for those who don't know, Lasha is just under 2 meters in height. The guy's 6'6". He's like just under 170 kilos, so it's like 370 pounds, I think. Mm-hmm. I want to say he just snatched 222, if I recall correctly. So like 490 snatch. He's approaching he probably will snatch 500 pounds in our lifetime. And I want to say his best clean and jerk is like 265, 264. Does that sound right, Max? Yeah. 264, which like 585-ish or something like that. I can't do the math in my head on the conversion. So we're looking at someone who has a non-negligible chance of going 500, 600 pounds in the snatch and clean and jerk. He's relatively young, not super young for a weightlifter, but he's still in his 20s. So it's pretty nuts, and he's a big man. So I think just kind of and also he's consistent. He's technically very impressive. Man, it's beautiful to watch him. He moves like, when you see big men move like that, it is a little scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Eric, I will say we're going from least bottom, where like Max, we could, present him a proposal, and I think it'd be pretty chill, to the person that will not make any deviations from the position. So we're going to my man, Alan, where he's done many different things: strongman, powerlifting, and weightlifting. You've done the damn thing. You've done all three. People might just see the luscious beard and categorize you as a strongman, but you're many things. You've done the 3 sports. Recently, I would put forth that in the last 5 years, strongman has become far more prevalent in the general lifting sphere, meaning that, as Max said, when we used to have these conversations, it kind of was weightlifting versus powerlifting. And now strongman's been thrown in. And we've even seen recently also, too, that Hafthor, the primarily strongman competitor, did a powerlifting meet. He was actually one of the judges was Boris Shako. And he did, of course, exceptionally well. We've seen also videos on the gram of, the main movement. So we're talking squats. Eddie Hall. I think squatting is, I could be wrong, 700 pounds for 8 to 10 reps. High numbers. Brian Shaw in the gym, deadlifting. We want to know, Alan, if we're in this iron jungle, there's no weight classes. You could use whatever you want. We throw them all in there, all these big boys, the super heavyweights. So maybe Lasha. We throw in Ray Williams. I don't know who you're going to pick for strongman. Brian Shaw at his peak. Hafthor. I don't know. Who's walking out of this thing alive, and why is it none of them?
So it is none of them. It's actually the NFL football player. That's
Right.
That's who is the baddest man in the jungle. So we would have to define strength, which I guess we can all go around the table and decide on what that is. But it's tough to. I would say that my understanding of this conversation was going to be which sport was the strongest. And so looking at that, if we just look at the origins of the sport of lifting weights or being strong, I think that, most people would agree just from a spectacle viewpoint, we would define the strongest man as someone who can pick up and put as much weight over their head. And that would be a weightlifter, because no strongman or powerlifter has ever put more weight overhead. It's a weightlifter. So if I had to give a straight answer, it would be a weightlifter as the strongest, I guess, strength athlete, if we defined it that way. But then again, why are we defining strength as a 1 rep max? Who's stronger out of, Johnny and I? We're going to do the deadlift. Johnny deadlifts 700. I deadlift 600. So Johnny's stronger. And then I say, wait a second, let's strip it down to 500 and do it for as many reps we can in 1 minute. And then I get more reps. Now who's stronger, right? So, but I guess if we can all agree that maximum weight picked up and put overhead, then for that definition, if we can all agree with that, it would be a weightlifter. And I think historically, that was the original test of strength. I think the max deadlift came way after that. Maybe it's because they didn't have equipment that could hold very much weight. I don't know. But that's my all over the place answer.
So let me ask you another question, Alan. Do you think putting weight overhead is really what came first, or do you think there might have been some lifting heavy stones and odd objects off the ground?
Yeah, that's a good question. First off, I don't know. Just assuming, speculation. But I think that when lifting weights became a sport or more of a spectacle or a circus sideshow, whatever it was. But yes, as just a true test, it most likely was picking up a stone or going back to Highland Games, seeing how far you could throw an object.
That's right.
But would they define that as, he's the strongest man in the village because he can throw this object the farthest? Maybe. I don't know. Because the argument could be that that's more of an explosive trait than it is a pure strength.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Well, so you also got the technical aspect in there too, because what if you've got a village, right? And there's 2 guys bench pressing, but one guy, rushes the press command even though he's lifting more. Do they suddenly decide, hey, this guy's not the strongest? I mean, yeah, he got red lighted, or he squatted a little bit higher than the other guy, right?
This is true. I guess we do have to frame strength as a skill through some movement. And I think like any good legitimized sport, goalposts should move, which is what we're doing in this conversation.
Soccer, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, totally legal way of doing it. And so I guess we should, I don't know why we don't do this more often, but have clear-cut discussions with people in iron culture. It's almost like that's our shtick, not having those. But let's remove some of the fog of war. I agree. We should only be talking about athletes who are trying to lift the heaviest load, not trying to throw a fixed object at distance or playing some strange sport that someone brought up earlier with an oblong object made out of pigskin. That sounds satanic and weird. We're not going to include those quote unquote athletes, but only people who are trying to lift increasingly heavy loads. So, okay. I think, Alan, you made a strong case for an overhead movement with maybe a notable, probably need a historian-based answer on lifting objects off the ground. So maybe we could think about, picking things off the ground, putting them overhead is kind of our at least our historical claims to strength. Here's an interesting one, and I want to, after your answer on this, Alan, I want to get Johnny's thoughts. Why are powerlifters getting crushed in the deadlift by these strongmen? And they can say straps, hitch, all he wants, but I don't think there is any
Johnny's
powerlifter
coming at you,
out
bro.
there. No one's going to be. You do whatever you want. You get 501 to lock out, then you can have the title, but ain't nobody able to do that. Am I wrong, Alan?
I think that it's the sheer size of the strongman could be one reason why they're setting such high numbers for the deadlift. I don't know of any, 6'8", 200 kilo powerlifters training specifically for a 500 kilo plus deadlift right now. So that could be it. I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily think that it's the training, because you would think that, high specificity training for the deadlift would be the most optimal way to train. Whereas strongmen are juggling a number of other variables. So I just think it must be the size of these guys.
Well, I guess it's true. Ray Williams is maybe the same weight as some of these other strongmen, but he is only 6'1".
Yeah.
Sure. So that I guess that could be a decent excuse. Johnny, I want to hear a true apologist for why powerlifters are terrible at deadlifting.
Yeah.
Let's get your opinions here.
Well, first of all, I think that the height point is a great one, because Ray is, like we said, 6'1". Jesuapa is the second best. He won Worlds since Ray bombed out. And Jezza is legitimately my height. Like, he is like 5'7". He might be 5'6", and he has really short hands, like short fingers. And Kelly Branton before... Too. Yeah, just everything is not built for it. And for some, what I will also add is I think for some reason sumo as a possibility does hold some super heavies back. Because even when I was talking with Dan Bell, who has the all-time world record untested in powerlifting, he was even talking about like considering going to sumo and things like that. And I think that really honestly does waste a lot of their time, because it's like it's very clear that the friction of their thighs and the extent that's going to push the bar too far forward is just not worth it. So I do think that holds some people back. And I also think that there is a counteraction with that, is that you're seeing some of these 220 guys who pull sumo actually catch up. Like, I think now that's why you are seeing Kaylor Woolham. That's why you are seeing Jamal Browner really pull out. And I will push back on the straps. I actually do think the straps, when you're talking that big of weight, I think it might be 100 pounds. I really do. Because when you're talking with a deadlift bar, how many meets does Eric Lillibridge do where his hand tears apart? Like, I feel like I've just seen that like a million times by now, where it's like always looking down the hand. Like, I get it. Like, but because Jamal Browner is a good example where he's pulled 1,000 pounds multiple times now in training with straps. And his best meet pull is 970, I believe. And that was on a 4th attempt. So his best real meet pull is like low 9s.
How tall is Jamal Browner?
I believe he's average height, like 5'11", somewhere around there, 5'11", 6 feet. Yeah, so it's like right at that size. I think it is, to Alan's point, is that there's actually is also one really tall powerlifter. I don't know if you guys know of him, the Australian, Dylan. I forget his last name, but he is like a legitimate 6'7", 6'6". He's up there. And he is the first man to ever squat 1,000 pounds and deadlift 900. So at 22 or 23 years old. He actually just recently got sick, unfortunately. So that is a guy where he might be able to do it. So I agree with Alan is I think the height or your pounds per height, I do think hold back your deadlift. And for whatever reason, due to the squat, Ray used to be 365. Jezza used to be 365. Ray went to 405 and he won. Jezza went to 405 and then he squatted 1,000 as well. So I think that rat race has pushed them in the opposite direction.
So I'm going to do two things simultaneously. One, crush your apologies. And two, greatly increase the number of fans we have in the UK and just say two words, Eddie Hall. Because the man's 6'3", he's over 400 pounds. And even if you take 100 pounds off his strapped 500 kilogram deadlift, he's still deadlifting more than 1,000.
He did a powerlifting meet. He deadlifted 909. Ray deadlifts 880.
There you go.
Add steroids, now he's got 920 maybe. Seriously, like.
Oh, so you're saying Eddie Hall is taking steroids?
That's a huge allegation.
Now we just lost
we might have
all
to
of our
edit this out,
UK
folks.
fans. You son of
Max, I'm sorry we invited you on. We didn't want to have this controversy.
Implying Ray is natural is still like, that's incredibly controversial in my crowd. It's funny that it's like, you guys realize I do this, like I'm friends with it. Like, yeah. I believe in it to at least enough of an extent to where I don't just totally assume like, oh yeah, Ray's on something or Jesse Norris is.
You know what I think that is real. Go ahead, Max.
Here's a possibility too. You think about Eddie Hall and the extent to which he actually trains his squat relative to his deadlift. And I'm guessing Thor's in the same group and pre-doing the powerlifting meet. I think a lot of big strongmen, my guess would be they don't train the squat to the same extent that, powerlifters are. I mean, Ray is training his squat quite a bit, right? Yeah. Jezza as well, where these guys maybe aren't, they're doing other things, so there's a lot of non-specific fatigue there still. But the fact that, if you're pursuing a gigantic squat, there's probably a lot of energy devoted to that, where it may preclude you from having the absolute largest deadlift possible, where deadlifting is, a significantly larger priority for a strongman. So, outside of just the anatomical things like height and weight, those guys are not as concerned with it, right? Because I think if we were talking about who has the biggest squats, it would always be powerlifters, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also when Vlad competed, it was a good example because Vlad, remember how he bombed out on deadlifts. So he had that 500 plus kilogram squat, bombed out on deadlifts, and none of it counted. And it's a really good example of in training, he was pulling with straps, extremely heavy weights. He was dropping at the top every time, which coincidentally is what he did at the meet. It's almost like practicing an error causes an error in competition.
Bold strategy.
Yeah. So I do think it actually connects to something that Omar mentioned to me private or to this group chat privately before we got ready is Taylor Atwood's 770 pound deadlift at 163 pounds. So he did that in training. What he hit at meet was 705. He ends with 705. So it's if he didn't post that 770, it's as if it wouldn't have existed. And he probably had 790 in the tank. So, I mean, I do think that difference being a legitimate near 100 pounds is, and at that heavier weight class, probably an actual 100 pounds is something that is tough to consider. And I do agree totally with what you're saying as far as training it being a priority and even on the day itself. Like when Ray squats 1,000 pounds, it like the energy in the room is you have to experience it to really know it. And then to think, okay, then 4 hours later, maybe you have to deadlift. It is a different demand in that situation.
I think one of the variables that we need to discuss is kind of the repeatability of the given event, or what are the constraints where you said, Johnny, like Taylor, as an example, 10% more than he pulled in the meet a few days later doing deadlift only. So it's like sometimes we're almost comparing apples to oranges. And I can't help but think of one example here where we're talking also transferability, right? So we're talking about who, on a given day, what can happen, but also if you're to transfer one person to another sport. So kind of like a weightlifter now is going to try and do powerlifting. How well would they do? You're going to take a strongman and they're going to do powerlifting. I actually have a quick question for Max before I go to Alan, because I know from doing a little bit of that strong boy hoisting that one of the big things to consider is there's many more variables. On game day, you kind of, the events, but as you're describing before, Alan, unless we're talking about world's strongest man, which, is very relevant, It's like, yeah, this log, like the log you're used to, the handles might be a little different. It might be an inch outside, an inch wider. This thing that you're going to be carrying the stone, well, you're used to this. Well, guess what? This tacky that they have available, what they allowed, or what have you. There's so many more things that happen that the specificity actually almost has to go down, and you become a little bit more of a generalist on that day. You have the 5 events to train for, but it's never the same static 5 events. So that's a huge thing to consider, as opposed to peaking and tapering for meet as a where it's always the same given 3 with the exact same variables. Now, I do have a question briefly, and Max, you would know this, because if we talk about transferability, I think one of the big conversations would to be had would be between static strength, as we're defining it, which is lower velocity. So you don't need, if you're squatting, to squat it up at a fast speed, and then power, so more explosive strength, where there's a speed component, which is kind of where weightlifting comes in. And I can't help but think of one individual. We're not talking now super heavyweights, but someone who's just kind of fantastic all around, Kloklaev, where he was doing, he did weightlifting, and the numbers. If you could just afterwards, Max, list some of his numbers. But he did strongman. He did very well in that. He did powerlifting. He was a beast in powerlifting. He also was an exceptional weightlifter. And he didn't win. He wasn't, a world's strongest man champion. He wasn't, an Olympic gold medal champion. But his ability to hop between those 3 was actually incredible. And I would actually put forth, if we're somehow to make an amalgamation, like they call it the super total, but now we're going to have it with the strongman component. It's like we have to consider, what are the events going to be? Because if we're talking even something as simple as stone loading, I'm going to say something I don't think it's super controversial, but like when Hafthor loads the stone, because they're the same static height, dude's 6'9". That's a different, him loading a stone is a big difference between someone that's 5'9", 5'10". So I think transferability is huge. Max, I just want you to comment a little bit on someone like a Kloklaev. So now, how the winner of this, if we're talking about who could do all of them the best, might not be anyone that we're even currently talking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say for sure Kloklaev is probably the greatest strength athlete, possibly the greatest all-around strength athlete, of our generation. I mean, he went from weightlifting, he did 210 snatch and a 253 clean and jerk, which are, a 210 snatch is one of those, that's like the equivalent of like a 950 deadlift. I mean, it's just unbelievable, right? Very few people do it. 253 clean and jerk is huge. He was, Russian national champion. Never made the Olympics. Never went to. I don't think he actually ever went to like a world's, politics, in his words. But also like he was a 900-pound puller, big squat. Not so much on the bench. But then we know his strongman stuff was good as well. And he even had, like, Alan might know this, but I think he had a record in the weight throw, right?
I'm not certain.
But yeah, I mean, so like all around he was a badass, and all around he was good at everything, but not, he was not Rizazadeh, he was not Lasha, he is not, Hafthor or Eddie, at the same time, he's kind of like great at all of them. He's like a really thick CrossFitter.
Yeah, really thick.
So yeah, I mean, I would say he would definitely, take that title of like the greatest all around guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So
we've got kind of Lasha as our example of the weightlifter. Alan, can you speak to who you think is probably? I know this is harder because the eras are different. It's not the same events all the time. But in your mind, if you could transport in time any strongman competitor and give the environmental advantages to them of any other time, who do you think is the best strongman in your mind?
So I think that to say who is the best strongman, I think a good quality of a good strongman, of a strong competitor, is your ability to compete, show up, and actually execute. And I think that being very competitive and determined is going to go a long way. And I think that's why Eddie Hall did so well, because he was so determined and competitive. So it's tough to say. There's obviously Bill Kazmaier comes to mind because of his ability to show up, execute, and compete. And then also Mariusz Pudzianowski, because he is, on paper, the most dominant strongman with 5 World's Strongest Man titles. He was fast. He was good at endurance events. He was good at max events. He was good all around. Some say that nowadays he wouldn't be able to hang just with the amount with the amount of max events and the heavier weights nowadays. They say he wouldn't do as well, but I think you could say that about any strongman in any of the past 5 decades. But yeah, on paper, I guess I would say Mariusz Pudzianowski.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear if you think I'm off base here. I think Mariusz would do probably still very well today in World's Strongest Man. I do think he might struggle at the Arnold, for example, just because there's more static events and it is more of a test of quote unquote brute strength, whatever the hell that means. I guess 1RM strength. There's more events like that. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. The Arnold is more static event because it's just a staged event and different promoters, but it is a heavier event. It is a more static event. So yes, I do agree.
Okay, then I have another question for you. If we frame our discussion of the quote unquote best strongman to be put up against other strength athletes, do you think it'd be worth putting Hafthor up since he's won the Arnold 3 times? And he's currently got the deadlift world record.
Like other powerlifters, other weightlifters in some sort of like big, I wouldn't put, oh, man, that's hard. I don't know if I don't think I would put Hafthor in there. I think again, I would probably even more confidently say Mariusz Pudzianowski, just because he is so athletic and because he originally started with mixed martial arts. He went on to do kickboxing after strongman. So I think just from a well-rounded athletic view, Mariusz Pudzianowski would still be my answer. If I was to put him against weightlifters and powerlifters. I'm surprised nobody has mentioned Shane Hammond yet.
Yeah, I was thinking
yes.
Who was not a strongman, but originally a weightlifter who did powerlifting, right? But the dude,
I thought he was a
like
powerlifter
powerlifter first. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
no shit. That's even so. That's and
Yeah.
I was gonna mention that, Max, when you said that
Right.
few powerlifters can go to weightlifting.
Right.
I was thinking, did Shane Hammond start with weightlifting? But yeah, this dude was like 5'9", something like 400 pounds, and he'd do his squat or whatever lift, and then do a backflip. It's just insane.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah. Shane was a stud.
And he would scare the crap out of the spotters because he took the descent far faster than your average person squatting that amount of weight, for sure.
Story I heard about Shane was that one of his first powerlifting meets, or probably his first meet, he didn't ever know how to like wrap his knees because at the time he was probably doing, I'm guessing, single ply. But he's in the meet and he does his first squat is like 700 or something like that. And then, I don't remember who it was. His eventual coach comes over and is like, hey, let me, have you ever done this before? And he's like, no, not really. And he's like, well, here, let me show you how to like, put these knee wraps on. And he ends the meet doing like 775 the first time he's done a competition, right? And so, from that day on, like just a guy who was that naturally talented and explosive and apparently was missing the part of his brain that was like, you should be a little bit safer on the way down, like the fear component of squatting. Like, oh, I'll just relax every muscle in my body and then I'll catch at the bottom. Yeah, so he was probably best example of that.
Love it. Okay, so we've got a challenger who's emerged from Max and Alan. Johnny, let's talk unlimited body weight powerlifter. Who is the strongest? Is it Daniel Bell or is it still Ray? I mean, again, same question I put to Alan. If you could equalize all environmental factors, who do you think would theoretically be the strongest?
Yeah, I think it would be Ray. Are we allowed to say Ray with steroids? Are we allowed to have a hypothetical Ray using steroids?
Hey, look, I personally do think Ray is clean because people who think he's not tend to have like these magical ideas, like they make you taller, they change your bone structure, they change everything. It's like there's most people, there's literally nothing they could do in this God's green earth to be as strong as Ray. And I think they just forget how much of an effect genetic talent can have. You know, like
Except
I tell people all
SARMs.
the time. Of course, well, those are magic. Those are
Sorry.
magic. Those literally came from another dimension.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think there are two objective things you could look at, even if you're completely skeptical. So let's say you just think, okay, Eric, you're just saying that because you're friends with these people and all that, and you coach Bryce, and Bryce needs the IPF to matter to some extent, right?
Man, the conspiracies we have to go through to keep Bryce on gear. I tell
So it's
you
like,
what.
so even if you didn't believe it at all, 0%. Jamal Browner gets busted for using, most likely. Now he said he wasn't. He said it was due to tainted supplements. Same story Kelly Branton says. Same story Yuri Belkin said. Same story like actually I don't know if Yuri said it, but every powerlifter when they get caught says it was just tainted supplements. Every single one afterwards explodes in strength. So very clearly, there is a meaningful limiting effect from drug testing, or else that wouldn't happen. I mean, Jamal Browner was deadlifting, I believe it was something like in the 780 range. And it went from like that range to 975 within 2 years. So that alone, I think, is a very strong reason for why it limits use on some level. And then the second fact is the population size difference. It's just the amount of lifters in untested powerlifting, especially the male lifters who would be admittedly using, since a lot of USPA lifters also just do it for their own reasons. The amount of lifters openly using steroids would be extremely small. So you're talking the genetic talent is just not going to be there. It's just not reasonable to assume. And also, I mean, you could even just say the fact that there are way more IPF lifters and IPF totals are not universally higher. To my knowledge, it's not higher in any weight class now, currently. Jesse Norris briefly was an exception to that. But I don't believe there's any case now. So to me, that alone proves that there's for sure some limiting effect from drug testing, some positive limiting effect.
I tend to agree. If I could give you a bit of support on the numbers game, like if you have enough people who get exposed to a sport, you're just going to see a higher range of outcomes. American weightlifting has only really compared itself to itself for the longest time. They're like, don't worry about China or the Eastern Bloc because we can't even compare. And a lot of times they'll blame drugs. I think the fact that we're starting to see a fair number of American weightlifters who are pretty damn good now, right around the time when teenagers who started playing with CrossFit are now at the point when they might be peaking their strength, is because with CrossFit, we're seeing greater exposure of Americans to weightlifting. And now we actually have the numbers. I'm not saying steroids don't make a difference. And we are all very aware of the current IWF scandals going on, where the efforts to clean up the sport have been blocked by some of the countries that are more notorious for not doing good internal testing. And there are absolute differences between countries and their internal testing versus what is done at the highest level. But just the fact that American weightlifters are becoming relevant again speaks to that population game. And I don't know if Max, if you'd agree with that or not.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. That's. I literally didn't want you to say more than for sure twice, so that was perfect. Like, don't add any more. Just be my yes man. Man, you mean clearing thetans and making 1% very shortly. Sorry I interrupted you with that tangent, Johnny, but I just say I totally agree.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's the thing that can't be understated is just how small the population is in untested powerlifting, and I think that is the thing that. Now this is, I'm gonna try to make this politically correct and not throw too many under the bus, but I'll say in a lot of conversations, I could tell some untested lifters have more similarities culturally to drug users in general than athletes. And that's just so insulting. But like, wow. I really know of a handful of untested lifters who did have other drug abuse issues or did have other health issues. And it's like, I mean, Greg Panora openly, so I feel comfortable saying his name, because he openly bragged about, like, back in the day, we used cocaine during the meet, and then we did this, and then we did that, and we didn't care. And, like, that was really, like, his tough guy post, and we lived in the car and blah, blah, blah. So it's like when you're coming from that type of culture, that's just not the same culture that Vernon Davis, the tight end in the NFL is coming from, or Usain Bolt. Like, that's not that, like, top-tier talent. Whereas I think now in the IPF, we're seeing more of that. We're seeing like Ray Williams and Russell. I think those are two guys where they're athletes first. And then they happen to find powerlifting. They happen to be very good at it. And then I do think the second issue that I have with this whole conversation, in a sense, is I think we're conflating transfer with complexity. It's just because something's more complex, it doesn't mean it has a higher transfer. Like you're more likely to find a really good golfer who happens to be strong, and then he's going to be the best at both of those things, because it's just nobody's going to be good at golf who's a powerlifter. Just happens to be that skilled. So I do think that can conflate it to where it doesn't necessarily mean that golf transfers better. It just means that's extremely difficult to learn. Now, obviously, weightlifting is far more universal than something like that, but that was just an extreme example to make weightlifting look bad.
Eric, you know what I took from that, as I understand, if I'm reading you right, what you said about untested lifters, is that basically no IPF lifter has ever jaywalked. Is kind of my conclusion from that. Is what I got. Law-abiding citizens, lawful good, and D&D were rolling, Eric. So what? They're chaos.
Yeah, exactly. The USAPL, the P stands for paladins.
We do know that there's a high correlation between low moral character and multiply powerlifting. So we can assume that just goes down the chain.
Right.
Absolutely true.
Now, here's actually
Iron culture. We're here to unite, folks.
Yeah. Well, you know what my favorite, real quick, Eric, is I don't think we're going to enter into this territory at all, but I actually had both the Burrito and Alan on where we spoke. We had like a round table, just some of the YouTube boys, and we're speaking about at the start half Thor's deadlift, if it counted or not. And obviously, when you're galvanizing certain bases and people are entrenched and you're having a open conversation where like no one really was super staked in any opinion, other than honestly Russ Spohl, where he's like, nah, man, for sure doesn't count. But he got so much flack for basically stating an outright opinion. To bring it kind of back in another way, John, I'll quickly ask you. I have a question for Alan. Is that we spoke before we talked about Kloklaev, which is one of the examples of a lifter, like a top tier lifter who did all three, did the damn thing. Now that we're entering Strongman in the description or into the fray of this competition, I can't help but think of the few powerlifters who have then tried Strongman to various results, doing well, like John Hack did well recently in a Strongman competition, and then Jesse Norris, who's just this phenom, came out of nowhere. Competed, drug tested, smashed the record. Still, yes or no for did I honestly forget John Hack? He passed in the 198. Like, is that done? Is Jesse's?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jesse's one of the ones that comes to mind for me of a powerlifter who has done Strongman. Can you just comment on that a little bit? Because you actually, a lot of people don't know this, you actually had a little bit of experience with weightlifting. It's not like people might think, man, this is
month, baby.
A month is long enough as far as I'm concerned. This is a zealot of the IPF. It's like, you look at all things, you're interested in all strength sports. Can you just comment about kind of the ultra specificity boys is what I'm thinking. So previously drug tested athletes, then expanding the horizon, because I would think, just very quickly before I open the floor to you, that the more specific you get, not that it limits oneself, but in ways it could almost mask your potential in terms of transferring other things. And what I mean when I say that, if we have that ultra, high arch comp bench, or like a sumo, which wouldn't be used in strongman, simply put, it's like, so we don't know. We're comparing, once again, kind of apples to oranges, or it's like you've never done any explosive movements. It's like, well, how's that going to transfer over then where you're trying to do, like my limited experience with the log press is like, there actually is a significant kind of explosive portion of it when you really want to lift maximal weight. So can you just comment on like powerlifters, strongman, because we kind of had that conversation of powerlifters and weightlifting, but how you see that breaking down? We have John Hack, Jesse Norris.
Yeah, actually, speaking of John Hack, did you see that he's actually going to focus on strongman in 2021? Did you see that?
I saw the announcement after LA. Yeah, the FitX. LA
where
Expo,
he's like full on going in. So yeah, I totally agree. And that's actually something where I have disagreed with people before, because I've definitely been with guys who are, or talked with guys who are completely in that, like, the rules are the rules and that's it. And then there's no such thing as strength outside of just random rules. And I don't believe that at all. Like, I really do not believe that. So I think exactly what you're saying is true. Like, the fact that John Hack pulls conventional, squats with an insane amount of forward knee travel while having an extremely strong rounded back conventional to some extent, I think does make him really dynamic. Like, I think that is really different. And yeah, I definitely think that matters. And you see, there are certain situations where it is tough to decipher, because it's like what we're talking about with the deadlift is actually, do any of you guys remember what Half Thor deadlifted when he did a powerlifting meet? because that honestly is the best answer to that question. Is we have
900.
the guy with the
Yeah.
strongman deadlift world record did a meet, and I don't think it was that high, right? Like
Maybe
It's
9.
low nines. That's
Yeah.
right.
yeah, it's low nine. So the thing is, I do think, like, I think guys like Ray do have really well-rounded strength. And actually, I think Ray, outside of his height, he'd basically be like a shorter Eddie Hall. I think that would be a really good comparison, Ray and Eddie. And I do think it comes down to things like, by the way, Ray's traps are like unbelievably huge. For like, if you just see him in person, it is just like ridiculous how his traps and lats are. So I think that when it comes to strength and things like barbell rows, things like that, which he told me he's really big on, I do think that really changes things. Because like there's a difference between guys who are kind of weaker in one lift because their thighs get in the way, and guys who are weaker in one lift because they're built just like starting strength manuals, kind of like myself. Where it's like there's a difference there. Like you see Ray pull, and he pulls like 850 and it flies off the floor. Dead stops at the knees and then grinds up, and then he gets called for a soft block. Like that, you can tell he's strong. It's just not, the leverage isn't working out right. So yeah, I would definitely say that would matter a lot with something like strongman, I imagine, where picking up stones, I mean, just the actual friction itself changes. And I think that's where someone who has bad levers maybe could actually lift a lot more than someone who has really good leverage and could kind of rounded back pull like 915 with a sumo.
I do. You go, Max. Go.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say that kind of brings up a point that's like, we haven't yet determined what metric we would use. I mean, we talked about the deadlift a lot, but there isn't like, if you were to say, well, what's the best singular or, contested events we could do to theoretically run these people through to say like, okay, is it like a like a power clean and a squat, or what is it that would truly give a good, a decent measure of where all these people would kind of fall? Because the other big thing that leaves this difficult to answer is that strong men, we're comparing the largest strong men, right, which are way larger than the largest powerlifters, right, or the largest weightlifters. Like the best, like the physically most gifted weightlifters ever, or the most gifted powerlifters ever, aren't in the same realm from a physical size standpoint. So it's difficult to say John Hack, right? He's just not as strong as Hathor. Like, he's very strong pound for pound. You can compare those things. You get into that category of like, okay, he's in that range. John Hack at 95 kilos, not even squatting as much as the top 95, 94 kilo weightlifters. So it's like, then there's this, it's just a weird, so is there, I guess the question, is there a set of metrics or a metric that we would say is like, yeah, for sure, that's enough variation between the movements that it won't favor one person's, leverages or size, but enough, isolation to sort of capture what exists, across all of these different sports to say,
well,
hey,
along that
these
idea,
people are definitely the best.
I was just gonna say, I what comes to mind to me is, who do you think would trap bar deadlift the most? If you just had a trap bar deadlift,
yeah,
because if you have like Ray, Shane Hammond, Mark Henry,
right,
Thor,
right.
like I think that would be really interesting.
I got a hot take for you guys. I think weightlifters have kind of, I would say in this conversation, have had the edge. There's been a few less gotcha moments, Johnny had a really long-winded rant about how he defended the terrible deadlifts of powerlifters. But
I think he also accused drug users.
Correct. He threw out everyone's on steroids except the IPF, and straps take off 100 pounds and a few other. He basically turned into like a YouTube commenter meme.
We learned that the IPF lifters don't jaywalk, though, and that's valuable.
100%. Really, like, strength is about how do you contribute to the society. That's the way I see it. So, but if we're gonna take a shot at weightlifters, I used to see them as the gods of the weight room, because I just couldn't even fathom doing a snatch or a jerk or some of these movements. And then I saw a few weightlifters who didn't train much for a powerlifting meet. They just got familiar with bench and they thought they'd go in there and do it. And the number of times I've seen weightlifters try to max deadlift, pull a 6 RPE, drop it at the knees and shake their head and go, oh, no way I could do that, is hilarious. And it really kind of makes them look ridiculous because, man, what I have seen also is getting a first attempt and then accidentally like doing a little bit of a pop with the shrugs and getting an up down call. That's a hilarious one to watch a weightlifter do in competition.
Yeah, like Clarence's push-pull was not like that crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been having that on my mind for a minute.
Hey, go in.
Like, is no one seeing this? I'm like, this is not as crazy as I think everyone expected.
No, so real quick on that, because Clarence Kennedy is someone on YouTube where he posted the snatch, the clean and jerk, really impressive numbers, and he does stuff naked, so like no knee wraps, no belt, none of those things. Real quick, Johnny, because I know Max wants to say something. You're the boy, you're calculating it, you're a mentat for the day. If you gave Clarence a belt and you gave him some knee sleeves, so he basically could compete in the push-pull, but with powerlifting rules, how much more would have boosted him, you think? I know I'm just throwing shit at you immediately, but we're going YouTube commenter mode.
Well, I'm going to give you technicality because you're saying push-pull, so that's no squat. See, that's the thing, is the squat really would be the thing where it affected the most. Yeah. So it'd just be the deadlift. And man, it's tough to say because it's exactly like what Eric said, is that it's so much their style that it makes powerlifters project onto that and go, oh, he could pull way more with the belt, with the rounded back, with a shin angle that's more vertical. But then they just don't pull that style. So, I mean, I definitely think it would help. Like, so personally, I would guess that it would add like 10 kilos to the deadlift, maybe 12 and a half. But I do not think it would happen. I actually think if you removed a belt and knee sleeves from a powerlifter, there are some where Jesse Wepa has a video where he's squatting like 880 at like RP 10 with no knee sleeves. Right. And it's like, it's that big of a difference where it's like 120 pounds basically with the belt and knee sleeves. But I think with the weightlifter, I don't think you can just throw those on and then all of a sudden it adds up. So it kind of gets back to what we're saying with transfer, where it's like kind of both ways. Just because you're super strong without equipment, it doesn't mean that then you have better transfer with equipment versus someone who always lifts with, you know, some equipment. I think as long as range of motion is the same, because again, multiply is the devil's work. Yes. Just to be clear.
Max, I agree. I want to talk. I would agree with that 100%. I mean, you're not going to find weightlifters that have the absolute highest. You know, as the velocity of the barbell goes down, you're not going to see weightlifters excel because they don't train like that. You know, you're not. There's very few weightlifters doing really big numbers like that. I can think of two examples of a person who was a weightlifter at a high level. There's an Iranian guy. He's a super, Ali Husseini. There's a training video of him doing a double overhand clean style deadlift with no belt with 370 casually, just, you know, at the end of his training. Yeah, and doing like bent over rows with 200 kilos. So yeah, that guy, you know, I mean, he could probably pull more. He could probably train deadlifts and pull 400. And there's a Russian former world record holder, Oleg Perepechenov, who got into bench press, got into powerlifting, and did exactly what Eric was saying, where squatted 320. He weighs, he must have been sub 200 pounds, so 90 kilos, squats 320 first meet, bench presses 275 kilos, and pulls 300 kilos barely. So, you know, built for the other two lifts, but a huge example of like those static numbers. Static is in, you know, that slow grinding kind of thing, not going to favor a weightlifter at all. There's definitely guys that are strong. I mean, Lasha probably deadlifts, you know, probably could do clean pulls with, you know, 350 if he wanted. But, you know, that's, you know, 350 deadlift for a guy that size is not 400. It's not, you know, 410. So, yeah, I mean, the weightlifters definitely fall apart in that sense once it gets to, you know, once it starts to slow down, once it starts to become about, you know, force production versus, you know, the speed of execution.
Mm-hmm. Alan, you look like you got things to say.
I was going to say something when we were talking about a lifter's style and how that really does matter. A little while back, Robert Oberst and Eddie Hall had some beef, and they were going for back and forth with their log press. And so they would post videos of them doing log press and training. And Robert Oberst has a good push press style. Eddie Hall has always been a pretty strict press style. And, the Eddie Hall crew would always say, oh, they just did the same weight, but Eddie Hall strict pressed it. He nearly strict pressed it. Wait till competition comes. And it's like, we're going to get to competition. He's going to strict press that. And Robert's just going to push press it, and it's going to be the same. Like, that's just their style, But they would always say, if Eddie just uses his legs, and it's like, he never uses his legs. He just strict presses. So it is what it is, So just to run with that style actually mattering. And some people have said, even in myself, I'll pull whatever without a belt, and people will say, "Oh, nice, without a belt," and I'm like, I don't really get a whole lot from my belt for the deadlift. For the squat, yes, but I've seen a lot of bigger lifters too, even in the gym, people that I've worked with, who put on their belt really tight, and it's just detrimental. And I'm like, let's try not using the belt, and they can pull nearly the same and more comfortably. So again, that just goes off style. Whereas, a YouTube commenter might say, imagine what he could do with a belt, so it doesn't always work like that.
Imagine if he had chalk.
Yeah, I was going to say the funny thing too is that it's like, if a lifter is not doing something, it's probably a sign that they don't get a lot out of that thing. Like, there probably is a reason, because, Eddie Hall knows he's not going to get a ton out of that. So it's not like someone randomly could unlock this insane potential, and for some reason they're not a human who responds to incentives like that.
I just like to leave 10% on the platform, bro. That's just my style, No, I to speak to that. So I unlike the standard person who goes from powerlifting to weightlifting and really struggles, I have had great success being a mediocre powerlifter and then being a subpar, mediocre. Okay, let's just say I went from powerlifting. I've done weightlifting. I would like to think people would actually watch some of my more recent meets and be like, yes, that classified as weightlifting, and then don't say anything else. Whatever else you say, we edit it out. And going from using a powerlifting belt to a weightlifting belt, I had to get better at taking an air and getting tight, because you don't get nearly much as pushback. It's thin in the front. And I've seen the opposite with some of my friends who've done weightlifting and then tried to do some powerlifting stuff with me. They're incredibly uncomfortable in like a 10 or 13 millimeter lever belt. And they really feel like it hinders them and it's distracting. So I think that's 100% the case, that there is absolutely a learning curve to using some of the common implements. It doesn't just, happen overnight when you put that stuff on. So I would agree with everything you guys are saying.
I was in that category too. I did my entire weightlifting career without a belt or knee sleeves or anything. We didn't do that. And, then I got into powerlifting, and my moral compass got skewed, and, I put on like knee wraps and a belt, but I always thought I was going to get so much out of a belt, because I always heard the same thing, like, oh man, if you put a belt on, or the comments like, hey, if we get you into a suit, if we get you into a 6-ply T-Rex here, we'll get you, But I put a belt on, and my best squat maybe went up 15 kilos, and it wasn't like a giant improvement. I never really probably got as much out of it as I could have, but it definitely was not this like, oh, you threw a belt on and there it was 55 kilos on the bar.
Yep. Did you squat low bar? Did you shift your squatting style when you moved from weightlifting?
I squatted high bar basically the entire time. As I got like later into the funny thing was that like as I put on the equipment like a belt or knee wraps, my strength probably went down, and to compensate for that, I put on I would change the technique, and I started moving to like a low bar squat and lowered it, and I think it was kind of like two things converging at the same time that basically maintained whatever abilities I had. Had I just, had I gone back in time, I would have never messed with my squat technique much. I would have stayed high bar, and I would have not ever worn knee wraps or a belt or whatever. But, at the time, it was like the meets that were around were, super training. And so it was like, well, that's what everyone's doing, so I'll do that. Yeah.
You heard it here, folks. Powerlifting squats are a remedial version of weightlifting squats. But go ahead, Alan.
Max, I'm just wondering, by chance, have you ever squatted the empty barbell up to 600 pounds without taking the bar off your back?
Yeah. So I did that. I did that video. The funny story about that is that was my warm up every day. So I would squat. I'd come into the gym every day, and it actually would be. I had these 50-kilo bumpers that I purchased from a friend of ours, and I would just leave them on the squat bar in the gym. So I'd walk in the gym. There's always 120 kilos in the bar, and the first thing I'd do is I'd walk over and my workout, and I would squat the bar with 120. Then I go 170, 220, 270. And then if I felt good, I would try, 290 or 300, and then, miss the next one. And so that was like every day. I just did that every single day. And so those two, the big guy in that video was like, hey, why don't you make a video out of this? And I was like, why? For what? Like, what do you do with the video? Like, well, you put it on the internet.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I did it. And, had TikTok been around, I would have been a TikToker. I would have been famous right now.
Clout game would have been on the other level. I do.
Go.
Wait, I was just gonna say, speaking on TikTok, because I saw a friend of mine shared how this guy's gone viral, and he's like sponsored by Gymshark, everything, and all he does is he posts videos saying, "Can I clean and jerk Ariana Grande?" And then he puts 105 pounds, and then he does it, and that was it. I'm like, what? And that legitimately has like 100,000 likes because 105 clean and jerk. We're like, all right.
John, I will say, much like how strength athletes all dump on CrossFit, us either YouTubers or podcasters or long form content, Eric, writing for Mass, we all dump on the TikTok crew because we know, let's be honest, genius.
They're honestly, and they're not even fazed by it. They're currently doing like a dance party in Times Square with cats. They don't even
They don't even
stopped
understand
listening 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, they're taking selfies the whole time we're talking. Mm-hmm. Now, I do have something I want to bring up very briefly, and that is our boy Alone is one of the few that's done the damn thing, meaning that you've spent some time doing strongman. So, and I would define that as maybe doing it at least for 6 months each. That's why I joke with Johnny about, doing it for a month weightlifting or
you need to put some more respect on his name. He is the Winter Warrior. Okay. Champ.
Whoa. Oh, so I did not know who I was speaking with.
Local legend.
The local legend. So we are speaking to a Sacramento. When you said Tommy Kono came out of there, Eric, we have to say Alan Thrall came out of Sacktown. He's one of the Sacktown boys, right? So same, we're battling it. Now, unlike myself, Johnny did, a month. I'm prepping for my 5th weightlifting comeback. For Alan, you've actually competed in each, and I would say you've done well in each. And I think Johnny actually brought up a fantastic point that can't be understated, in that we can't mistake transference instead for complexity, in that there are extra requirements maybe when it comes to weightlifting, or just simply due to the fact that some of those skills, there's almost like a cap, and I don't know if Max would agree with that, meaning that in weightlifting, like if you start at 12 and you then become an adult and you do it for 8 to 10 years during those formative years, you're going to have a differential advantage over someone that did not. And so to try and go back in time then and say like, well, now you're an adult and, you take a strongman, it's like, well, we're going to try and teach him, weightlifting. It's like, it's probably not going to work like that, right? Because there's more requirements, right? There's more things to consider, like just even positionally. So, Alan, cue for you. From doing the big three, and by big three, we mean strongman, weightlifting, and powerlifting. What did you find? And you did them at various stages of your lifting. So it's not like you did them all three to start at the same time. So it's hard to make these comparisons, but from being a strength athlete, doing the three of them, what did you feel between the three was the hardest to acquire those skills and excel, and what was maybe the easiest? And I know, again, we're talking, this is like the theoretical to this entire conversation. It's basically just 5 guys that love to lift heavy shit, talking about lifting heavy shit and coming up with an excuse, which is the nature of this conversation. So go ahead.
So what exactly is your question?
If I had your beard, would you be the Winter
Which
Warrior
one of the
champ?
3 was the hardest to learn and most challenging?
I mean, the obvious answer should be weightlifting. However, I was never coached. I just did weightlifting for a year by myself. I just did some programs that I found on Catalyst Athletics. And then I went and competed. I did it by myself. I didn't have a coach or whatnot. So to say, I took some time to learn this, I don't know. I just did what I knew or what I thought I should do. I will say that I did all throughout high school when I started, and in middle school when I started lifting weights, my football coach never had us do deadlifts. We would always do cleans, not power cleans, but actual cleans, and we do clean complexes and whatnot. Very mildly coached, but I think just doing that for so long and doing that at first, that was like part of my first program, I think helped with when I did, start to do weightlifting. I just did what I learned, and so I think that in that sense it was somewhat easy to learn. Powerlifting, I wouldn't say was challenging to learn. Strongman, same. I don't think it was very challenging to learn. I'll say that weightlifting was the most challenging because it is mentally the most challenging. Just to jump under a heavy barbell, throw yourself under a heavy barbell, or just move quickly every session was really, really challenging for me. And I would say that powerlifting is challenging in the sense that the variation is so low that I just have to stay very focused. And I know a lot of people are like this, that they can train powerlifting hard for 12 to 16 weeks, and then they've just got to like lay low afterwards. And I think that a good powerlifter has that trait and that they could do it year round. And then strongman is easiest for me to adhere to because I just enjoy doing it and I can always do something different. But as far as learning your actual question, I would say weightlifting. That would be my answer. But again, I wouldn't say that I'm well trained as a weightlifter. I might go to a coach and he would say, good Lord, you need to learn a lot, so that's my answer.
If you watch Max's videos instead of Callus Athletics, I think that was your first mistake right there. Subtle shade at our boy Max. So Matt, I just want to apologize. Yeah.
It was the book. It was the book, Olympic Weightlifting by Greg Everett that I had. And I just did that. And I read that. There's programs in that book. I didn't even use the internet at that time to look up, weightlifting and whatnot. So it was a book, a paper book.
A paper book, not even a PDF.
How to define it for us and everything. This is like pre-internet for Alan. It's like, what year was this? He's like 2011. I'm like, oh, okay.
So I have a kind of back to that point of like one metric. I think there's probably the only single exercise, probably the trap bar deadlift, but I think as a group, probably no one consistently does that, or you could say is consistently involved in those programs. Whereas like the high bar squat would be the one exercise that is probably universally done by all athletes in these sports. The question would be, I guess, like outside of it favoring certain body types, because a guy with super long legs is not going to be a great high bar squatter. That exercise is like a really great comparison across all three, where you see, there's been, I can think of several weightlifters that have squatted, or rumored or been said to have squatted in the 400s or, over 400. And we know that powerlifters do it quite regularly, as well as strongmen, right? So like, I guess the question I would have for like everybody is, what do you think outside of high bar squat would be something that would be like the best comparison to those other, best metric, at least for them to compare to?
Can I nominate a 3-lift competition that might be non-specific enough, but wouldn't unfavor anyone except maybe one movement? So trap bar deadlift, absolutely. High bar squat, strict press. And the reason I say strict press is when I first got into Olympic weightlifting in 2012, I met Richie Patterson, Stas Chileev, two of the best male lifters in New Zealand. These guys both have around, like, best case scenario, like a 190 jerk. So I just assumed, because I don't really know what was going on as a powerlifter coming into it, so what do you guys, can you strict press like 150? And they're like, no, like, you're out of your mind. Like, what are you talking about? And the drop off was shocking. And they also just don't train it that much. Like push presses, sure. Like jerk from blocks, power jerk, and stuff like that. So I think people would think, oh, strict press would favor weightlifters. I think it would favor strongmen. And I think a lot of powerlifters use it as an accessory. But I think And I would love to get all your thoughts. Like, how do you guys feel about that as the big three, as a challenge for these three sports?
Isn't that just a Mark Ripito competition?
Yes.
Yeah,
Strength
lifting, a low bar back squat, initiating
No high bar.
out of the hole with the hips.
The Zercher Good Morning and the Power Curl with body movement.
That's what if you get, I'm sure you've heard Mark Ripito say it, or if you were to go to a seminar or get a credential, he defines strength as your ability to produce force against an external resistance, which he made up. But at that point, it's okay. Then what's the external resistance? He would say it was a barbell. But the argument could be, okay, you have a high bar squatter who squats 500 and a low bar squatter who squats 500. Who leg presses more? We don't know. So why does that external resistance have to be a barbell? Why can't it be a leg press? There's no skill in that. But I think that we all like lifting barbells, so we're just going to agree to use a barbell. Yeah, but I agree that a high bar squat should be in there. But then you have someone who might be limited to, then the argument of depth comes into play, or I can't reach depth, but I can leg press more than you, so it's tough.
Johnny?
Yeah, I would say the one thing where I think has not gotten its shine, and I think it would absolutely be necessary, is weighted pull-up. I saw Josh Bryant did a competition where it's a legitimate 1 rep max weighted pull-up, and it looked absolutely awesome. And I think that's what powerlifting's missing. And I do, to be clear, by the way, I think strongmen are the strongest, by the way, to answer this question, because I have just defended powerlifting the whole time, is I do think it's strongmen. Yeah, and I do think a big part of that is because there is no incentive to train your biceps, to train your lats, to train your rhomboid, to any of that. And honestly, to me, it's a little bit frustrating because you get to a point where the incentives are so important that if you're benching, like I am 5 to 6 times a week, full body days are 4.5 to 5 hours long sometimes. I mean, if you're pushing everything, it's just to a point where you have no time, like you have no reason to do it. And I think a weighted pull-up would help. I do have an issue with the overhead press, besides the fact that I'm god awful at it. Like literally 95 pounds. If I did 95 pounds right now for a 3x, it would be hard. Like I'm not even joking. It's like I think I've gotten worse, and as I've benched like 395. But I do think there's an issue with what we talked about, where I think you need to pick either something where we're equally detrained at or equally trained at. So I think the trap bar deadlift oddly does meet in the middle, because none of those groups have trained at it. So I think it actually would really open it up. But I don't know. I don't know if a weightlifter maybe could trap bar deadlift more than any powerlifter. Whereas
I would say that.
What was you saying?
Just to butt in really quick, I would say that was similar to a farmer's walk. So the strongman will probably take that, but
yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting, because I just could not imagine Ray bending down and like getting like his legs going, and then with straps on. Like I don't know. I wouldn't bet against that. As someone who's seen Ray like personally in the warm-up room, that is just a lot of meat in one singlet. To where if that thing just did not have leverage just bothering him during the deadlift, I mean, I just don't know what would happen. I actually think Big Boy of Strength Cartel. Do you guys follow?
Yeah.
He's trap bar deadlifts over 1,000, and I'm like, that is the body type of a lot of powerlifters. Right. Like he has exactly that, like 6 foot, maybe 5'11" body type. But yeah, overall, my issue with the overhead press is I do think strongmen would just crush. I think they'd just dominate. I think someone like Eddie Hall would just kill everybody to the point where I don't know if it'd be comparable. I think that's the issue.
That's fair. I think I agree with that. The funny thing, team, and Alan, I think you'd probably agree with this. If we went back to the 90s, this would be a very different conversation, because strongman was actually, or even maybe the 70s or 80s probably is a better time point. Strongman competitions were the way we'd answer this question. You'd go to a strongman competition and you'd have a shot putter, you'd have a bodybuilder, you'd have a center, you'd have a weightlifter, a powerlifter, and they would go at it on completely non-specific things. Many times, blowing out your knee with a refrigerator on your back.
Oh my God.
Rest in peace.
It was much more of a strength test because those guys weren't trained in really any of those events. And it was like a circus sideshow to get all these different, people from different disciplines and have these random events. Whereas now strongman is much more of a sport. It is much more standardized, and people do train year round for it. I think it was in the 70s, one of the first few World's Strongest Man competitions. I don't remember what his name was, but he was this big guy. He was from the United States. He's from Georgia, and it said his name and his tagline said "Pig Farmer."
Maybe we've underrepresented one group of strength athletes. So,
man,
Bruce Wilhelm won the first one, right?
Yep.
He won the first World's Strongest Man, right? As a weightlifter. And
so a lot of those
powerlifting as well, yeah.
Right. A lot of those first guys were weightlifters and powerlifters. I think because weightlifting was more of a sport, a sport, powerlifting was just something that they started to do. And so, a lot of those guys, even in the 90s, a lot of those guys had a background in weightlifting, or they were just really good, super heavyweight weightlifters.
Yeah. And I think also something that we haven't directly touched on is I think anything involving distance, since Alan, you brought up farmers walks. I think anything involving distance would be, in my opinion, needed. Like, I think the ideal strength test would be at least 4 events, maybe 4 to 5. But personally, I think I totally agree with high bar. I do think that's a better test of strength. And a lot of guys who are great powerlifters like started off high bar. I personally go high bar, trap bar deadlift, weighted pull up, and then if not exactly farmer's walk, something that's distance related so that you could normalize for range of motion. Because I do think there is a punishing of taller athletes, which is why, again, Thor is, 6'8", right? And he was top 10, but he was not number 1 in powerlifting when he did his untested with wraps meet. Whereas realistically, is he the strongest? Probably. Like if you had to see the bar go up and down that far, you would probably go, yeah, that was probably the best expression of strength that we'll see here. So I do think you need at least one event that rewards a bigger stride.
Now, real quick, Johnny, because your boy's about to shine. We're talking about pull-ups here. For this Josh Bryan competition, is it body weight plus the loaded weight that you're carrying? Like, how do they calculate it out of curiosity for that specific one?
That's a really good question.
Because I'm thinking of strongman competitors being 400 pounds. That counts as a 400-pound pull-up,
I think
just to put it out there,
Eric, go.
Just to put it out there, you squat your whole body too.
Just saying.
Yeah. I think that gets to where you're giving yourself too much credit on some little stuff. If you're like, hey man, I weighed this one.
So the lighter guy might excel. That's what if we're just going by external load, what Eric said, it's like your boy damn near almost was it 150 pounds on the load doing a neutral grip pull up. Like, let's throw that in there. All right, let's go.
Was 150 added on to his body weight?
No. That I'm saying it's like if we're talking about loads, I'm about to enter just that one lift. The rest, that's junk. I don't give a shit about it.
I think it'd be interesting because a bigger guy connects back to Alan's point about reps, where it's like a bigger guy like Ray can do 10 hard full range of motion pull-ups. For him to add 245 might be completely doable with no issue. Whereas like we could do 20 to 25. And it's like we add 145 and maybe that goes down to like 3 reps or something. And then 245s, maybe we just can't do any. Right. So I think it would be, because from what I saw, I believe it was a legitimate 1 rep max video. This is like the very back of my brain here, like maybe a 6 years ago video. But I think that ratio would be really interesting.
I think I have a thought experiment. We could actually solve this instead of us arguing about movements.
Go.
All right. So we've got our challengers. We've got Lasha, we've got Ray, and we've got Marius. We fortunately also have a quantum time travel and universe creation device. No. We got God to help us out answer this question. Let's say that.
So Draper's in it. Good. Okay.
Draper's here to help us with Draperism, and Paimon is helping him. This is a unique convergence of the elder gods. All right. We get their genetic code. They are birthed into the same training facility, all 3 of these gentlemen. and they are given the best training and all the best environmental factors. And in 1 year, they have to compete in a powerlifting meet, a weightlifting meet, and also a strongman competition that has kind of like the archetypal 5 kind of key movements, whatever a panel of strongmen aficionados would agree on is the archetypal strongman competition. Who wins? Who wins at least 2 events? We have to get some like coefficient for your 2 totals, and then add some kind of weighted points for the third. But who do we think would do the best out of these 3 if they were trained that way?
I'd say Marius.
Marius?
He's gonna win strongman. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You were talking.
I would say he's gonna win strongman for sure. He's not gonna win powerlifting or weightlifting, but neither of the other 2 guys is gonna do as well in 2 of those events. Maybe, I mean, I would be surprised if Elisha was just, able to come in above Marius in the powerlifting. I would guess that Marius is probably a little stronger, probably has as good a squat, much bigger bench press, and probably a comparable deadlift. Right? And I don't think
I
Ray.
have the sense that Marius would have a small deadlift. I don't know, like the
Maybe,
way
but
he's built.
Yeah.
Just a 6
Yeah,
ounce.
that's true.
Like he kind of has that nuggety built that a lot of guys tend to have like weaker hamstrings.
I like that.
So we picked our players before we actually listed what the strength test was. And now that I know the strength test, I'm going to change my player to Eddie Hall. If we're talking
I can see that.
high bar, if we're talking high bar squat, trap bar deadlift, and strict press, and it's all weightlifter, powerlifter, strongman, Eddie Hall is going to win that. He's going to win the trap bar. He's going to win the strict press, and he'll probably do really well on the squat. And even if you talk about if he was to compete in a weightlifting meet, I think Eddie Hall could power clean and press at least 180, like just shy of 400. If we're talking an actual power clean, he can't continental clean it. I don't think he could do. I mean, not quite 200, but 180 to 190. I think he could power clean 180 and push it overhead, which is a pretty damn good if we're comparing this to other athletes.
Alan, you gotta get on my level here. Hold on. So the question is, we have their genetic code. They're born in an alternate reality, and in the same year, they're doing all 3 competitions. All right, you got to expand your knowledge. All right, you got to just
now keep in mind Eddie is fully hydrated, so you are
Eddie
considering.
Hall would win powerlifting though. Like I got to give Alan that
For sure. Yeah.
For real, he would win all powerlifting.
I'm still gonna go with Eddie Hall. So I changed my created character, and I'm gonna go with Eddie Hall.
I think Ray would do exceptionally well in weightlifting.
Yeah, I can see that. I asked him if he thinks he would make the Olympics, and he did. To Max's credit here, the skepticism, he did seem like I had to egg him on, and he's like, "Yeah, sure," but didn't seem like something he really believed in.
Trained from
What do you
birth.
think Ray could snatch?
Yeah, from birth,
see, that's
it's a different. It's a different story, you know. But then, if you're going to ask that question, we're looking at the people that have excelled in their sport. You know, if you were going to take somebody from birth, why not like Larry Allen, right? I mean, Larry Allen, that dude, probably the strongest human being that's played a sport, you know, professional sport. I mean, so it's like it's a little tough because we know, you know, I mean. If we think about what Johnny's saying, right? I mean, the horrible life choices people that have taken steroids have made, and the way that forms their demented psyche and leads them down these roads, finding themselves in a dark alley late at night,
jaywalking,
doing who knows what for another hit of D-ball. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I would say Ray's got to be up there as. But I think Ray, it's like you're probably going to end up with a person that wins it because they do great at 2 of them, but not great at the third, and which is kind of an unsatisfying victory. You want the guy who's got to win, who's going to do well in all 3, and get that sort of, victory across the board rather than like, oh, well, Eddie's so fucking strong in both lifts, but Eddie deadlifting 501, and we know what it took to get him to 501 or 500. is not the same, is not the thing that's going to make Eddie snatch or clean and jerk anything respectable at that body weight, right?
Very true.
So it's like it's a tough, thing.
Eric, I want your opinion because I'm
Yes.
actually going for the Pyrrhic victory then, based on what Max is describing. And that's why I picked Kuklaev, because I would say that at the very least, he might not take first, but if we're going by coefficient then, so it's like, some sort of, there's like a Wilkes, a Sinclair, how will we figure out per competition, then like the grand total or what have you? Kuklaev, it's like he might not win any one of them, but he will at least do really well. So he'll place, a high second across the board, maybe take for like depending upon who our entrants are, might take first and one. You add all that stuff up. I'm picturing Eddie Hall kind of like gut bouncing. He's like power clean, and then it's like kind of on his chest a little bit, and then it's like if we're going by weightlifting rules, I could be wrong here. Again, haven't competed in the damn thing, but it's like they would want you can't press out like a jerk, right? Like there'd be what in those rules, like are we going by the rule where you can't press it out, so to speak? So it has to be weightlifting style then.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think that's fair, and I like where you're going with that. Here's another take, and this is I'm gonna get a little Nate Silver on everybody, and think about this probabilistically. Okay, so 538 strength dream. Okay, the hidden button on the website. If we think about all the people we've nominated, who is more head and shoulders above the rest of the field? I think that's Lasha. I think if you compare Eddie Hall, or if you just the fact that Alan changed his character tells you that there's actually a lot of strongmen who are clustering around potential best of all time. I would say Ray is nearly as dominant, but there is also Bell, who we were talking about. But I feel like Lasha is not near his peak, and he is like a solid lead above anyone who's ever done it before. I feel like if I was going to bet on standard deviations of outlierness from birth, I would bet on Lasha, personally.
Does weightlifting have a higher population than both these sports, by the way? Do we know
Yeah,
for sure?
yeah, it's got to.
This tricky
Well,
son. I knew he was going to say this.
There's a lot of
It's valid. Very
there's a
valid.
lot of people out there in Asia and Eastern and Europe who do the weightlifting.
Yeah, because
For
that
sure.
reminds me. Because your argument reminds me of, I believe it was actually Max, you and Chad, right, who had the top 10 strength feats, and then Jen Thompson was number 1 due
Yeah.
to the statistical argument. And then there's
Yeah.
always that part of me that's like, I've heard she benches once every 8 days, and it's like when people ask her, she's just like, it works. I think people train too often. And then it's like you can tell it's like there is there's not that moment where you're like, you were the best, and now it's like 10 people are on you, 15 people are on you. Now, obviously, she is like unbelievable. So there's really no telling how many people it would take for it to get tough. But I do think that connects back to what we're talking about with the degenerate aspect of untested powerlifting. No, is that like when it's steroid use with no centralization, you're talking like it's like Red Dead Redemption. It's Wild West. So there is a difference between that and just like, look, I'm just going to do it. And if I'm doing heroin also, I'm doing heroin also. Versus like, okay, we have a team. This is national pride.
Well,
So,
the other,
yeah.
yeah.
You heard it here, folks. It's USAPL or heroin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Max, were you going to say something?
Well, I was gonna say the other point to that, like a lot of those people were putting, Eddie Hall finding himself in strongman, Ray Jones, same thing, or find themselves in the sport later on, right? Where it's like Lasha was, when he was 11 years old, here's some pills, you take these, you go home, don't tell your parents, and then these, boom, 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 like a very different degree of trainedness in those guys. Where like some of these guys, Ray Williams is like he was squatting like 800 for reps before he had the equipment to do it. So it's like a raw talent, probably Ray.
Max, how many streets do you think Lasha legally crossed in his life?
If totally,
Yeah.
honestly, when I've seen him at Worlds and been there, he's the most mafioso looking character in the entire event every single time I've seen. It's him strolling down with a bunch of other dudes from Georgia that look like they had just, they've got some stolen VCRs they can sell you. I mean, just not a shady crew, every time.
So Max, my answer before Alan changed his selected character, we're talking about now the Caucasus Mountains. So Georgia, we have Armenia up there, we have Dagestan. When he said Marius, it's like, well, it's true, he was a kickboxer, he was a terrible MMA athlete, and using MMA math, I'd actually just put Khabib above everyone because my strength as a skill is whooping that ass then. So it's like, what are we actually now talking about? Because Marius, which is funny, one of his passions is mixed martial arts kickboxing. He's regarded basically as the top strongman, certainly one of the best. It's like, but he loves MMA. It's like, you're terrible at it, dog. He
got beat by a weightlifter. He got beat by Zeman Galecki.
Like it's amazing. It's like just how these things can descend. Now, Max, I do want to unite everyone here because usually in groups you unite by dumping on someone else, right? So it's like in comparison to someone, it's like, well, at least we're not that. Like for Johnny, it's like, well, at least I don't jaywalk. Like I understand this, And so I will say that for all of us, we could feel better because recently, I think I saw this on my IG, not quite TikTok. I'm not quite that deviant yet, but on the Instagram is there's a CrossFit event where it's a max squat. Did anyone see this? Max press. Max, maybe you saw that, and max deadlift recently. Like it could have been for the CrossFit Games or whatnot. And everyone can kind of gloat here. I think it was a high 400 squat. The overhead press, I was shocked. It was 210 was the best one. Now, of course, they're not. And then it was a 567 deadlift. No joke. Now, of course, that's not what they're training.
What did the men's section do?
Were those pounds?
Pounds, yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah,
Thought
no,
we were talking kilos for a second.
No. I was just gonna. So it's like I'm just joking because when people's like, well, at least they're not CrossFitters. It's like, and I saw that show up on the Explorer, and I saw people in the comments like, why are they lifting so little? It's like, well, that's not like the typical events they do or whatever.
I thought you were gonna ask what top strength athlete would not, like
who would get the heart attack first?
Well, I was gonna say the answer to that. I think the one person we haven't spoken about is Dave Hoff. I think we should be including multiply powerlifting in this a little more because as far as I've seen, none of these other people have squatted in the 1200s.
Dude, that's a good point.
Look, who lifts the most weight? Period.
Because apparently there are monoliths and canvas Kevlar suits in the jungle.
Now, Eric, one thing that can't be understated is that in a high-level competition, doing what one needs to do in order to win, bending the rules a little bit. We've seen it all too often across sport. Like, did the person's foot actually cross the finish line? Did they pull the other person down when they're running in that triathlon? It's like, who is willing to do the most to get to where they want to be? And that's where Hoff comes into play.
Like, what if your relative is spotting you and they kind of just
hands on, it's a hug.
Yeah, right. You got your buddies. Your buddies are helping you in the squat a little bit. I mean, it still counts because it's family.
Yeah. Well, the response to that on YouTube when someone mentions that is, "I'd like to see you even walk that out with your uncle behind you hugging you." Yeah. And then you go, "But you didn't walk it out. It was a monolift." What are you talking about? I think we've done a fantastic job, gentlemen. We have covered multiple different angles on this sucker. And I think we've come away with, it's not clear. And we have great respect for all sports, so long as those sports qualify as sports, which means moving a barbell or maybe a rock. And I just want to say that you guys did a fantastic job. Is there any final notes you want to say on who is the strongest? I'll open the floor up to anyone. Alan, you first. Since you got here last, you're gonna leave earliest.
Say again?
Ronnie Coleman.
Well, duh.
It would have to be a bodybuilder. I don't know how we didn't even mention that.
Of course. Well, that's why we didn't include them. It wouldn't be fair because Ronnie Coleman is the unbelievable.
Quote or maybe paraphrase Brian Shaw. See, I don't even know if I have the quote right or if I have the person right. Pretty sure Brian Shaw said someone had asked him, what do you think of the title? I forget who it was, but it was an Olympic weightlifter, gold medalist. What do you think of them having the title World's Strongest Man? And he said, how can you be the world's strongest man if you can't go flip that car over? So I'm going with that quote. How can you be the world's strongest man if you can't flip over that car? So strongman wins.
Boom. So yeah, I unsurprising take there, Alan.
Yeah.
Max, second final word.
I would tend to agree with that on some level, but I guess if the strongman can't hold something over his head that's at least his body weight, it would be, well, I guess in Brian Shaw's case, he might be a little under there, but yeah, that's tough.
I like it. He took a shot at the size. Always a good way to go. And Johnny, third final take.
Yeah, so I would say the main thing is every single one of us has strongman in the top 2. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strongman wins. That's how I view it. Is that you got to look for, even if we don't have our bias right up to there. I mean, I love Ray, and then I'm like, okay, Eddie for sure somewhere. and then if Max loves Lasha, but it's like, yeah, Eddie somewhere. So I think that alone puts it at the top. It's just too undeniable.
I can't disagree with you, Johnny. And I think strongman always has been like the entry level is to be an elite powerlifter while also being able to put a crap ton of weight overhead to even compete at the highest level in strongman. So that tells you something. So I just want to thank all three of you gentlemen for your time, your input, and your condemnation of jaywalking. Because here at the Iron Cult, we are trying to promote a equitable society that includes everyone except jaywalkers. That's the only out group here. And with that, Omar, I'm going to let you ride us out into the sunset.
Yeah, and I don't want to throw a wrench in anyone's training or any train of thought because I know Alan has to go, but I think we seriously should consider a 5th event if we spoke about those previous 4 for this general big 3 competition between these factions. And the 5th one would just be tying your own shoelace without passing out. And I don't know if any of them would qualify. I don't know if anyone would get a 1. They would mainly probably max get 0s. Every single competitor that we listed. So strength comes in many different forms. I want to thank every single person for tuning in. Hopefully, I can't read it. Wait to read the comment section where this gets shared maybe somewhere on Reddit by some specific forum. And they're like, oh, these guys are idiots. So I just want to say thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go.
Is there any way that we could actually personally do a strength competition like this? Like, what if we come up with this rubric and then we just do it? Like, as far as us doing max trap bar, max weighted pull up, max high bar squat,
and overhead press.
I think we should.
John doesn't like that one.
So we're throwing that one.
As soon as we agree,
you need to learn how to perfect the double layback.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's the lean back press.
I think once we agree on 3 or 4 lifts,
I'm
sometime
down.
in 2030.
After my meet, I'm down. I'm competing in like a week and a half. After that, there's like no goal due to Corona, so there's absolutely zero structure to anything.
And Max is just going to show us all up.
As long as we sneak in a side tricep, I'm in too.
Pose and after. There you go. Involve everything. Leave your rating review on iTunes, even if you hated this episode because your faction didn't win. On YouTube, go ahead and leave a comment. We'll do our best not to respond. We're back every single Monday from now until, when that competition happens.